It's almost time of the year where we are in the performance review cycle. I know this is a super dreaded topic for many of you. Do you remember those nicer times when you were graduating from college with a lot of energy thinking that you're done with exams? Well, the performance review system is kind of like a proxy for that, and you go through it twice a year, just like you did in exams. In spite of the very high importance of this performance review system, I see a lot of people have a laid back attitude who just go with the flow into these conversations. And it's not that they don't want to, they just don't know how to begin and walk out of the conversation feeling like they know where their career is headed and knowing that their manager is invested in them. We are here to fix that. Let's figure out how to have your performance review conversation and make sure that you get that well-deserved promotion. Hey folks, welcome back to my channel where I talk about life and careers in tech. For those who are new here, my name is Divya and I'm a program manager lead at a fan company. I know I'm guilty of not posting a bit more regularly and I've not posted in the last 2 weeks and I'm sorry about that. It's just that there's so much happening right now in life. Work travel has begun already, which is awesome, thanks to the pandemic subsiding in some parts of the world at least. I'm apartment hunting all over again, which is interesting, and I found an amazing place. I'm going to maybe do an apartment tour at some point. And I've been going into the office a few times, which has been awesome because I've been getting to meet with my colleagues and see them in person and have interesting, meaningful discussions, play in the office, and just experience my colleagues beyond icon on the screen. Alright, let's dive right in. So there's a lot of work that you need to do before even getting into these career conversations, right? It's a lot of sustained, consistent work that you need to do with your manager to set expectations, align on ratings, scope out your work well, and so on and so forth. But this video will specifically focus on what to do before you're going into that dreaded room to have that conversation with your manager, where they're going to reveal your rating on how you did for the last few quarters or the last few months, and you're going to figure out what to do next together. I also want to give a shout out to Colors of Chloe, from which I'm borrowing this chart very generously, which shows the large scale of ratings that exists. It's typically a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 in tech companies, generally trying to indicate whether you are meeting performance at your level in the same way that they expected the job ladder to be designed. And in cases where you need to grow, you need to exceed that performance by some form, and that's where the rating kind of begins from, say, 2 or 3 onwards. Step 1, input and output. Now, this is a framework that I've learned from my own manager, and it's really interesting, so hear me out. Input is the set of things that you put into your job, which results to the output, which is the things that you get out of it, right? And these input parameters are consisted of attributes and complexity. Let's unpack them a bit more. So attributes are specific traits that you're exhibiting at your particular job level and your job ladder. So let's assume you're a product manager or a program manager. So the kind of job attributes that you need to show are, say, stakeholder management, leadership, strategic decision making, and so on and so forth. So you need to figure out what are those input attributes for you, and you don't even need to do that work. There'll probably be a document within your company which highlights what are the attributes that you're supposed to have. Now, once you know what these input attributes are, you also need to have a mental map of where you are in a realistic way into these attributes. So whether you think you're weaker at some parts of these attributes, which would help you get to the next level or not. So just know these well before you're getting into that conversation. Another very critical part of the input, which we frequently overlook because it's not a tangible skill, is complexity. A large part of being successful and growing to the next level is in picking up complex projects which are compliant with what the next level demands. So you can't keep doing the same level of complex projects at T4 or L4 as you were supposed to do to get promoted to L5, right? And this input parameter of complexity is very critical in the decision making process for your manager. So just knowing and having a mental map of these complexities that are associated with your project is important and a very interesting discussion point for your eventual conversation that you're going to have. Let's talk about the output piece. So the input attributes combined with the complexity will result into the output. Look, we can all argue that if you're leading a very complex project, which is also displaying certain attributes at the next level, but if you're not showing impact to the company or if you're not showing impact to the business, really it's very difficult for the manager or the company to argue for a bigger rating for you. So let's get this right, that output is critical and there are certain benchmarks or parameters that would be defined again at your job level and your job ladder. For example, if you're a product manager, you could be defined by the number of launches that you're landing or the engagement patterns that you're seeing. If you're a program manager, it could again be how you're managing your stakeholders, how the launch timelines are getting affected, and so on and so forth. But these impact metrics are very critical to define the output in itself. And this output parameter is what will show what is it that came out of the work that you did, and having a mental map again of where your output is, and knowing very clearly for each of the project that you worked on, what did it lead to and what did it mean for the team and the company, will be very critical in driving that discussion with your manager and help you figure out whether the output that you're generating for the company is consistent with what you're expected to do at your level, as well as the one that you're aspiring to get to at, which is N plus one. So, this is the time when we are self reflecting and making mental models of where we are situated with our projects. And this is really important pre work. And it doesn't take a lot of time, it just needs very active thought process into what you've done. And many a times in the rat race to figure out the next big thing, we tend to forget this very basic thing that it needs to be a good balance between the input attributes of skills as well as the complexity and the impact. So, for example, if you're a T6 or a T7 who's doing, work of a T5, it's not going to fly because you need to consistently show performance at that particular level. Step two, listen. No, I mean, listen to your manager. I think it's very critical that in these meetings, when you go into the room, pause, let your manager take the lead, let them set the floor by giving you a rating, explaining their rationale. Believe me, it's very good to assume good intent. Check out that podcast on why conversations go wrong at work if you already haven't. Assume good intent in that conversation. Know that your manager has also potentially worked hard through a lot of calibration sessions and discussions with their peers and so on and so forth to agree on this rating. So give them a chance first to explain their decision making process. This is very critical because when we are in these high pressure situations, it's very easy for us to kind of start talking over a bit. Don't do that. Just actively, intentionally listen with a good intent to what your manager is communicating. See what are the places where they're giving you positive feedback, what are the places where they're alluding to um, some form of negative feedback or works that you need to do, and so on and so forth. For those, try to map them onto the input and output framework that we spoke about, whether it's the attributes of the skills that they're talking about, whether it's the complexity of the projects, or whether it's the impact that's coming out of your projects, right? So calmly observe and understand their feedback and actively listen during that time and think intentionally about the feedback that you want to take from that meeting instead of just trying to figure out what you want to say next. Step 3, ask intentional questions. So once your manager has discussed the rating rationale and given you the final rating, you would have now thought of key questions that you want to ask from one, the input output scenario that we spoke about, but also I'm giving you a few questions that you should be asking. First, start by thanking them. As I said, managers do a lot of work behind the scenes to make these ratings happen. So make sure that you thank them for the work that they're doing, saying, "Thanks a lot for sharing my rating. I really appreciate the amount of work that you've put in to explain my feedback in more depth. I'd love to ask you a few clarifying questions if that's all right with you," and then begin to ask a few of these key questions that will help you understand your own rating better. So ask your manager these three questions. Number one, I wanted to know if there were any skill sets that you thought had a lot of room to grow, especially gaps that you could identify which would prohibit me from growing to the next level. I'd love for us to work on a plan to make sure that I'm able to get those skill sets and grow in my career. Number two, I wanted to learn a bit more about my rating decision. Were there any specific major factors that contributed to the rating skewing towards the current rating versus to the next one? Were there any factors that I should know of so as to make sure that I'm working on the right things? Number three, do you see any gaps in the current projects that we have, specifically with regards to how complex they are or how impactful they are? Can we work together to ensure that these projects are indeed stepping stones to the next level? Step 4, talk about the future. Now, this is a very critical part once you have identified the feedback areas that you want to work on and the manager has given you a very clear indication of your rating. It's very important that you state your goals clearly. And you don't even need to beat around the bush. Saying things like, "I want to grow to the next level because I'm an ambitious person who wants to grow in the next few quarters," or whatever, is completely acceptable. You don't need to give a very fancy, crafted kind of like a version of why you want to grow. That's completely acceptable. It's understood that as a professional, you would want to grow into your career, and it's perfectly fine and acceptable. As you walk out of the room, both you as well as your manager should have a very clear idea of what they need to do as your manager to make sure you're able to grow to the next level, and what you need to do, the kind of work that you need to put in to make sure you're able to grow. It's very important that you document these learnings and the gap areas that have been identified in these meetings so that you can go on to the next performance cycle and make sure you are able to point to these saying that, "Hey, look, I've worked on these things and I'm curious where I stand," and so on and so forth. And believe me, the next performance cycle is right around the corner. It's just a thing which always happens. Alright, so those were my 4 easy steps to make sure that you ace your performance conversations and not randomize them. I also want to call out that performance review decisions are very, very subjective. Sometimes they're completely out of your control as well, especially about promotions. Firstly, all tech companies really need you to perform at the next level for a few quarters or a few cycles even before they promote you. So that's, of course, one thing you need to keep in mind. Second, sometimes your team might not have the right allocations to grow you to the next level in terms of the resources that they have or the budget that they have and so on and so forth. So that could be completely out of your control if your promotion doesn't come through. Sometimes the team might not even have a business need to have a person at the next level. So they might just have more interest in keeping you at the same level because they don't have a business need for the next level. So identifying those signs which are outside of your control is very important because it's very easy to mull over these decisions and make them really personal as to things that you did wrong, while many of these things might be actually out of your control. Another very important thing is, and I keep hearing this from a lot of people, is that these decisions many a times are arbitrary in their own regard, and it's okay if it doesn't work out this time. It might just work out the next one. I'm curious on how you approach your performance reviews. Comment below with your experiences and hit that like button if you thought this was helpful, and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in the next one.